Hello friends, for today's video we are back with another From Readers. This time around it is 2 book talk from readers. And I did not ask any additional things when I presented this prompt. I did not ask you what are things you want to see more of, what are things you want to see less of, what irritates you, what do you really enjoy about book talk. I just left it at 2 book talks. So some of the things might be positive, some of them might be more critical, but I'm actually going to structure this video a little differently than I have with my previous From Readers. Rather than having gone through as many of your responses ahead of time, I'm actually going to raw react to these. I did have to take screenshots of my patron responses, but I'm going to go to the community tab itself and just go through as many comments as I can. And the upside to this is I feel like I get to react alongside you to the points that people are making, which I really enjoy. The downside is there might be some repeats, there might be some things that are said that are similar, which I might be able to just cut out in editing, but let me know which way you prefer. Do you prefer it to be more of a raw reaction, or do you prefer for there to be a little bit more filtering of comments ahead of time? Let me know. I'm happy to do either way, but jumping into it, the first one, and I'm starting with the patron responses, the first one says, please specify romantasy and don't just call it fantasy. I don't want to read a fantasy book that is hyped to find out it is just smut. So I appreciate that all you're saying is, can you please specify so that I know, because this has been a problem in marketing I have found as well. And I know we've touched on this in some previous From Readers videos, but I do find that nowadays it seems like sometimes marketing is trying to almost, I feel bad saying it like this because this is a little dramatic, but they're almost being slightly deceitful in how they market things. I've noted that I think currently, not always in the past, but currently, I think that even if there's barely a romantic subplot in a YA novel, I think they up the idea of there being a romantic subplot because, and once again, I'm speaking very generally, but YA readers are more often than not, I have found, to be ladies, and ladies are not as embarrassed to pick up things with romance, or they don't feel shame for picking up something that is more notably a love story. So if you say that there is a love story in a book, then it's not a negative for that particular demographic. However, in something like adult fantasy works, I do think we need to be reflecting and we need to be introspective as a community on how we talk about romances and stories, because sometimes for no reason at all, it's not relevant whatsoever. A person will say, oh, I just don't really like romance in my stories. And it's brought up out of nowhere and you're like, okay. It's kind of like when women tell men out of nowhere, I just don't really have very many female friends. And you're just kind of like, okay. So all your friends are guys and you're feeling the need to tell this random guy that. Why is that necessary? So I think sometimes as adult fantasy fans, there's like this desire to say, well, like, I don't want to read fantasy romance. I just want fantasy. Like somehow it's a negative to have romances in a story, but realistically, people fall in love. Realistically, people have relationships and attraction, and there's tension. And even some of our favorite stories that are not even remotely considered fantasy romance, and I would bat an eye if I did see that they were considered fantasy romance, they still have pretty prominent romantic subplots. I feel like something like Mistborn is a great example. But regardless, where I'm going with all of this is to say that marketing, I think, is aware of this. I think sometimes marketing knows, hey, if we admit that this is a romance, a lot of fantasy readers that pick up adult fantasy will not want to read this. So let's downplay the romance aspects in the marketing, and let's put a kind of generic sword on the cover or some kind of imagery that's just mostly like the text and a crown or something. And then they won't even know until they've already purchased it. I'm making them sound like these malevolent mustache twirling, like, let's just make all the money in the world type of villains. But I do think that there's potential for them to downplay because they know their demographic will not want to pick something up if you even give them a hint of a romance. What I would prefer as a consumer and as somebody who cares very much about people picking up books that they genuinely are likely going to enjoy, I always want things to be presented as clearly as possible. Is it just fantasy with a little bit of a romantic subplot? If there's not really a need to mention the romance, then don't even mention it in the synopsis, or don't even mention it when you're talking about it whenever you're hyping it up on whatever social media platform. We're currently going to be, zeroing in on BOOKTok. But if it's relevant to the general synopsis, then talk about it. If it's not, then don't talk about it. But I don't like this sort of deceitfulness that is, I feel sometimes, or at the very least, negligent presentation. That's also a dramatic way to put it, but whatever. We'll move on. I don't love when it feels like we're not presenting books accurately. So, I don't think all of the blame is necessarily to be placed on BOOKTok readers, because I almost wonder if BOOKTok feels as though they're speaking to a specific crowd, and when the more fantasy-focused readers happen to come into the picture and they find somebody on BOOKTok, they don't fit within the crowd that maybe the BOOKToker is talking to and feels that they are a part of. So maybe it's just a matter of BOOKTok has gotten so big that it's not just this smaller group of readers that have specific tastes, and because it's broadening, I do think that we can do a better job of being clear. I'll add one more thing, because oh my gosh, have I talked about this first point for way too long. But I think this is also a fault of short form content. I think short form content encourages you to very quickly get through as many things as possible. And I don't know if they're going to take the time to be like, so let me give you a level of just how much romance is in this on a scale of 1 to 10. They're probably not going to take the time to go through that thoroughly. They're probably just going to be like, oh my gosh, they had a female character who's feisty, and there's dragons, and there's the one bed trope, and there's intrigue, and they're going to do that. You've all seen it, where it's the cover of the book and there's these certain points that go around it that are like, these things are in the book. And that's probably mostly what's going to come out, because you have a very small amount of time to talk about stuff. But I'm with you. I agree. That's my big takeaway. I agree with you. I would love it if all of us, marketing, readers in general, people on BookTube, and people on BOOKTok, if we can be a little bit clearer about when something is fantasy romance versus fantasy. Moving on. Dear BOOKTok, can we please boost anything besides ACOTAR for a minute? I love the series too, but even I'm getting exhausted from overexposure. Yeah, I don't think this is a BOOKTok specific problem. I do think that ACOTAR it's just popular, So I think it gets talked about. Sarah J. Maas's works get talked about a lot. I think BOOKTok, because it's short form, is almost more accessible to people who are just getting into reading, people who are getting back into reading. It's more accessible. And I do want to always strive on my channel to not ever have somebody feel intimidated and feel like my channel's not for them because you're not in the know. You don't know what is good and what's not good, or you don't know what's already been there, done that. I want everybody to feel welcome, regardless of whether you've been reading for 50 plus years, 70 plus years, or you just started getting into reading again as a hobby. Whatever the case may be, I want you to feel welcome. So I never want to alienate anybody. And because BOOKTok, it feels like they're sort of where BookTube was, X amount of years ago. I don't want to put a number on it, but I do feel like we're seeing this cycle of the books that BookTube hyped up before BOOKTok's getting into, and I think it's just the natural progression of things where new generations of whatever group, in this case we're talking about readers, they're going to get into something and they're going to kind of accidentally act like they discovered it. So I can only imagine people that loved Way of Kings before BOOKTok, BOOKTok too, before BookTube was really a big thing. And then you have all these booktubers being like, oh my gosh, have you heard of Sanderson and the Cosmere? Let me introduce you to it and tell you the best reading order. And there's people probably losing their minds like, I've been a fan for forever. BOOKTok is just experiencing that maybe a little bit. So they feel excited to tell people, have you read this series before? And then there are tons of people that are like, I haven't. And then BOOKTok sort of perpetuates this idea that ACOTAR needs to be hyped up when you're like, we already all know about it, but we know about it. A lot of us who have been reading. For people that are newer to it, I find it is kind of their entry point, and it's still an entry point to this day for people. So I agree. I would like it if we could hype other things up, But I feel like one of these days we're going to have another new app, and then there's going to be book readers that go over there, and then they're going to talk about ACOTAR, and then BookTok and BookTube, and probably like the old school bloggers are going to be like, we've already gone through this. So I don't disagree, but I just think it's expected. Next up, to Book Talk. Please stop recommending the same things everyone else is reading. Tell me what you found at the bookstore on the weekend that you thought was cool, or a childhood favorite. Anything but Lucy Score, Sarah J. Maas, Fourth Wing, please. You know what's funny? I don't know who Lucy Score is. So anyway, but yeah, this touched on a lot of the same things that we just went through. The next two are a little more negative in nature. It says, to Book Talk, stop. Just stop. And then the next one says, dear Book Talk, disappear. I don't know if I agree with you. I understand that you might find it frustrating, but I do think it helps a lot of people get into reading. And it's just another area where bookworms can come together. So I don't know if I share your feelings for it, but there are, just like anything, there are corners of the internet that are more appealing to me and less appealing to me. I don't know, half a day, kind of got sucked into book threads. Threads being that new form of, it's basically like what Twitter used to be, except for it's through Instagram. Anyway, Instagram, I feel like an old person being like, so I don't know if you know, but this is how Instagram works. But Instagram, if you don't have an Instagram, it will show you threads that it thinks you might be interested in. And I gotta say, it knows my taste, because it every now and then will be like, you might be interested in this. And I'm like, gosh darn it, I am interested in it. So I'll click on it, and then it leads me to threads. And I'm like, I can't be on this, because I spend way too much time just looking at people's thoughts and being like, wow, people are ridiculous. Wow, people are really dramatic. People are blowing things way out of proportion. The nuance is just not here. And I just get sucked into these, and I'm like, why am I here? It's short form content. It's never gonna go as in depth as I like. And obviously, I have a tendency to go on and on and on about certain things, because I'm like, I really want to touch on every single little bit of this topic. I want to get to all the details. And short form content rarely does that for me. You know where short form content works? Puppies and animals, like cute clips of them. That's what I want short form content to be. So when it comes to book reviews and book content, I want a little bit more. But anyway, I don't want it to disappear though, because for some people, this is how they get their book recommendations. This is how they get into reading. They see somebody having a reaction and they're like, yeah, that was my reaction. That's all they need to see. It works for them. Doesn't work for me, but that's okay. Next up, Dear Book Talk. I know it is short form only, but the compilation video is like 10 most disturbing books you'll ever read, and then only showing the book covers and super quickly, so the viewer needs to rewatch 10 times to catch any of it. I personally prefer I think there's a typo. I personally prefer to watch a longer version with just 3 books with a short explanation. So I agree. I do wonder sometimes if people purposefully make things go fast so that you have to watch it multiple times, so that it increases the amount of views it gets, which then maybe puts it more into people's algorithm. Is that what it's referred to as on TikTok? What's it called? Like the For You page? But anyway, I do wonder sometimes if it's intentional or if people are just trying to cram a lot into a certain amount of time that supposedly is the peak amount of time a video is supposed to be in order to get lots of views and go viral or whatever. But I can't stand that, because I'll see this on Instagram also. And what's frustrating is the beginning will it will give you a really long time to see what the prompt is. So let's say the prompt is like the best political fantasy books. And at first it's just, how do I not have books like near me for once? I do have books near me, but hold on. So they'll have like a book like this, and then usually there's a stack of them, and it will say whatever, and a person's just holding it, and then it'll like show all the books. And then it just ends really fast and it repeats. It goes back to the beginning. And you're like, what the heck? Why did you spend so much time on the prompt and not give me a second to look at the 5 books that you were holding? So I think it's on purpose. And I just get irritated because I'm like, whatever. I'll look up stuff about political fantasy if I want to. But I also prefer having a little more information. I do think, though, on the flip side, and to give some benefit of the doubt, and also just to recognize that people are different, I know for a long time people were frustrated that a synopsis would tell you so much about the book. It would borderline spoil the book for you. And what's kind of nice is by having things that are just, this is going to have political as a big aspect of the story. But we'll use that as an example. This is political fantasy. You don't really know all the details, so you're just going to take a chance, and you know it has this one thing you like, but the specifics you don't know. You don't have to even worry about things remotely being spoiled for you. I kind of understand why that can be exciting, but I usually want to know a little bit more. So I think I lean toward, I guess I just don't like the extremes. I don't like the idea that we need to either tell everybody half of the story in the synopsis, or we tell you nothing except for a single point. I kind of want to know somewhere in the middle. That was it for the comments over on Patreon. So switching now to the community tab. First up, your name is Bookish Vampire Feasting. That's quite the username. Tropes being held on a pedestal and determining whether a book will be popular or even published or not. Books got so tropey that you don't have to read them anymore to know exactly how the story develops and progresses along with the characters. Also, the fast fashion where we get those poorly developed books that read like first drafts that only rely on said tropes because they need to be published until this trope is hit and popular. The meat of your comment is about the way in which we're just seeing things being trope after trope after trope, and the plot progression is exactly the same as it was in this other story. And I did recently do a video that kind of touched on this topic about why so many books are starting to feel so similar, and it was more so rooted in fantasy romance, just because fantasy romance is newer, so it's not newer as a formal genre, I should specify. And I find that other genres have gone through this. Fantasy has certainly gone through it. I'm not saying fantasy is better, it's superior. It's always been so original, because it absolutely has not. There are so many fantasy books where you're like, I can see the clear inspiration, and I can see what the trend was at the time that this was being published, and we can recognize trends now. I think part of the problem is that because books are such a social thing now, which ultimately I think is a net positive, but it does mean that we very quickly can identify what's working because everybody's shouting from the rooftops on their social media or on whatever kind of, review site, whatever. You can consider that maybe social media as well, but everybody's talking about what they like. And so it's really easy to figure out what trends are popular among readers and then just looking for more of that, as opposed to trying to find the stories that are going to work. In some ways, this can maybe turn into a positive, because if you're a reader who's like, I don't understand why we're not getting more of this, fill in the blank. If a ton of people are like, why do we not see more of this in books? Then there's a potential for that to be listened to and be like, here you go, here's more of that in books. Let's say, as an example, you want to see more parents in stories. If everybody's really saying we need to see more parents, it's really important, whatever, then that might end up in more stories as a result. So it's nice to be listened to, but then when it turns into, okay, this is making us money, so let's just pump out whatever has this, and you're not really looking at the story, the quality of the way in which the story is told, the writing itself, the character development. When you stop caring about that and you only care about this one little thing and how well it's going to sell, that's when it turns into a problem. So I agree with you that I do think it would be nice if we didn't just sort of have repeats of the same thing over and over again. I will always say my issue lies with publishing in this regard, not necessarily always with writers, because I do find more often than not, writers aren't aiming to copy everybody else, because the amount of time that it takes to write a book, the amount of time it takes to try to get an agent, then for the agent to sell the book to a publisher, it's not as quick as I think people sometimes can feel it is. So I think a prime example is when An Enchantment of Ravens came out. A lot of people were like, it's just a copy of ACOTAR, because the main character, there is a love story between her and a fae, and also the main character likes to paint. But that's kind of it. I mean, there's courts, but that's not a Sarah J. Maas specific thing. That's much older in its association with fae, which I have to say really fast. I discovered recently, you know how earlier I was like, this is why I shouldn't go on Threads. So apparently, tell me if you've heard about this. People were upset at Rebecca Yarros, who's the author of Fourth Wing, because they feel that she copied Sarah J. Maas because she has wyverns. And I was like, huh? She didn't create wyverns. And then other people were starting to chime in saying they'd been accused of copying Sarah J. Maas because they had stories with Faye and there was quartz in their story. And people were like, you plagiarized, you just copied Sarah J. Maas. And you're like, what? I would encourage either Googling those things or reading other fantasy so that you don't accidentally show everybody your butt. Next up, Cat BOOKTOK. I feel like if a book portrays a very toxic relationship, it shouldn't be recommended just as a romance, as there are a lot of kids on TikTok, and there's an issue with teenagers reading Colleen Hoover, etc. I know it's not a responsibility of TikTok creators, but I feel like romanticizing toxic things doesn't help anyone, but at least adults understand more. I appreciate that you have that nuance incorporated into your comments. I know it's hard to have nuance when you just have a little bit of basically like a paragraph to try to get your point across. So great that you were trying to be very clear, like, I know it's not the TikToker's responsibility, all those things. So bravo to you. I recently, so I am working on a video. At the time I'm filming this, I haven't read all the books for this video, but I'm working on a video. I've mentioned it in a few other things before that I'm trying to go through a bunch of different fantasy romance books and then give thoughts for each of them individually, but also talk about them in relation to fantasy versus in relation to romance as a formal genre, all these things. And one of the books I picked up was Captive Prince. Not romance. Not romance. That's all I'll say for now. I definitely go into it a little bit more in that video as I have already recorded that clip. But that book says romance. On the back of the copy that I have, it says romance. And I'm like, no, it's not. No, it's not. I understand that some people have very, very harsh lines as to what can be considered romance. Like it has to have the meet cute, and then it has to have the third act breakup, and then it has to have a happily ever after. And I don't know if I so strongly subscribe to that view that it has to fit within those things. But I certainly think that if something's going to have a toxic element to it, I would prefer that it more directly is considered dark romance, or if it's a fantasy story, maybe it's grimdark, because at least in that instance, you're specifying that there's going to be dark content in there. A romance, maybe this is just me not being as aware, so if somebody has more knowledge of romance as a genre, you can chime in. But to me, romance is like love story. And love stories can certainly show some negative sides of relationships. I think a good, realistic romance shows the way in which people are flawed and how we come together and we fall in love and we persevere for love despite the ways in which we can hurt each other. You know, I know that that's a thing and that can be really well shown in stories, but I think if the whole story is basically like, yeah, he's really abusive, but like he's also tall and hot, and then that's not the same thing, you know? It prevents us from having that depth that I think a lot of us would like. It doesn't really show development. It is more just almost, I don't say fantasy as in this kind of fantasy. I mean, like, it's like a fantasy of it all. It's a place to, I guess, almost safely explore these concepts, or I guess to be a little adult here, it's kind of like the way in which people with their spouse might, or significant other, whoever, they might like role play a little bit. And in a way, I feel like certain dark romance books are kind of like that. But again, that's like a role play. It's a way to imagine something while still being safe. But I'm not a psychiatrist, so I wish I kind of want to talk about this kind of stuff to a psychiatrist and be like, why do we like these things? Like as a collective, not necessarily every individual person does, but it's like, why do we get entertained by this? Why, when Jaime Lannister pushed a kid out a window, do we still be like, yeah, but like he becomes more rootable later? You know, like why do we do that with our stories? I think it'd be really fascinating to talk to a professional about that kind of stuff. Anyway, moving on. Please tell me what the books are about instead of classifying them into specific aesthetics and tropes. The fixation on tropes and aesthetics drives me mad because often books are forced to fit into single categories when it's more complex than that, and it's frustrating. I agree. I do like the concept of a list, right? So if you're like perfect fall reads, great. but I want to know why they're perfect for fall. And also, what's the book about? Or what makes the fall aspect so prominent in that story? You know, I want to know those specifics, and I just don't know that short form content is great for that. But as I touched on before, sometimes people just want to know that one little thing. So I know it serves a purpose for some people. I just like knowing more information. One thing I don't understand is how a book is considered a BOOKTok book when people start talking about said book on YouTube years before TikTok, and before YouTube, how people just talked about it before the internet was really even a big deal. I agree. I think it's just a lot of people are talking about it on BOOKTok. I think it's just trending on BOOKTok, and thus it's a BOOKTok book. I think that's really all it comes down to. But it does, you know, it does kind of make you feel old. You're like, but what about me? I talked about it before. Aren't I cool? Next up, I don't like that most of the books on TikTok portray toxic love relationships and romanticize them. Fourth wing, I'm looking at you. That being said, I'm happy that people are reading again and it is becoming more popular because of TikTok. Just make better authors more popular. Okay, so I do like that you're like, here's my gripe. Here's why I think it's great. Your last thing about is kind of funny. I would maybe word it as, please make other authors popular, only because I try really hard for myself. You know, I'm not upset at you or trying to like finger wag at you, but for myself, I try really hard to not be like using like objective terms, like these authors are objectively better, even if I personally think there are a lot of authors that deserve a lot more hype, which I do think there are a lot of authors who deserve more hype. I might just avoid that wording, but we did kind of touch on a lot of what you're saying. I would really appreciate if there was more variety. I will extend that to BookTube, though. I will say I think BookTube sometimes falls into the same traps where we talk about the same books, and I think it just depends on what people gravitate toward. I think part of the problem is that people like to be entertained by the person they're watching, and in order to be entertained, you have to have some knowledge likely of what they're talking about. So if it's an unknown story and they're talking about it, you might be like, well, I don't have any context for this, so I don't have any feelings for what they're saying, or I don't find what they're saying funny. Whereas if you've read, let's use Fourth Wing as an example because you brought up Fourth Wing. If you've read Fourth Wing, and you're like, what is this? And then you see, you know, a YouTuber talking about it for an hour with embarrassing skits, you might be like, oh my gosh, yeah, exactly. You know, you can gravitate toward that because you are a part of that. So I do think that sometimes people can end up always going for the popular thing, the creators, I mean, because in their minds it's like, oh, this is what people want to see. And then they want to also partake in that, you know, you're part of the conversation with me. We're experiencing this together. And I think that can lead to people never looking at the lesser known works, which I understand that there's different purposes for different videos and different creators are great at different things. I try to have a mix of both just because I do like being a part of the conversation, like a lot of people. And I know for some people it is entertaining. On the flip side, I also really want to uplift authors. I want to ensure that as much as possible, if I think something is great and it's underhyped, that it gets more love and it gets more hype. But I guess just different videos serve different purposes. Next up, I love BookTok a lot. It's a great list of books I will never read in my life. My foot's falling asleep, sorry. Yes, I had a feeling that's the direction you were going in, because I'm like, BookTube tends to not love BookTok. I have a feeling you're being snarky. This is more of a publishing problem than strictly a BookTok problem. I feel that there is an increasing push for books to be specifically made to go viral. This has always been a factor in publishing to an extent. Trend chasing has always existed, but recently it seems like there's more and more books that aren't given the proper attention from editors and are instead rushed out with the sole purpose of generating hype. I am frankly not the target audience for a lot of BookTok books, but people can like whatever they like. Romance is not my thing. Spice is not my thing. But if something is well written enough, I can enjoy it. It just saddens me to see so many mediocre books blow up that have the potential to be great, but aren't given the attention in the editing process to get there, because it seems like the only thing the publishers cared about was if the book checks all of the go viral boxes. I want to like romantasy, but I feel like the standard of quality on a basic story and even a basic prose level is mediocre at best, amateur at worst. I'm a writer, so I'll admit I'm extra picky about quality, and I can't just turn my brain off and enjoy something that's only okay, but I think everyone benefits from more thoroughly edited books. This can be a whole video topic in and of itself. Here's what I will add. I think that even before Book Talk, and like you said, you don't think this is a Book Talk specific problem, I think authors who are very successful, this has been a conversation for a while about those authors don't seem to be getting edited as much because we already know their books are going to sell. So as soon as the book is available, it feels like we're just trying to put it out. And so that's why sometimes authors that are really popular later and later into their career, when you expect their books to get better and better, it almost feels like they're getting worse and worse. And I don't think it's that the author has gotten worse. I think it's the amount of revising, editing, taking time to really make sure it's the most perfect version it can be. I think that starts to get a back seat. And that's really unfortunate. I do think it's true. I think it happens. But I will say, I have also found a thing that I think is relevant to what you're saying. There are authors who are self-published, and I am always way more forgiving and understanding because I too like to write, and I also know how much it costs to get a book edited, to get a book professionally formatted, to get an audiobook done, to have the artwork for the cover done, all these things. My dog came in and she's pawing at the ground and spinning in circles. If you can hear. Just gotta get the just perfect spot. Oh, Luna Bear. There she goes. Okay. Anyway, so sometimes things are self-published. This is where I'm going with this. And maybe I will be a little bit more considerate of the fact that I am asking this person if I'm really going to hold it to the same standard as a traditionally published book when it comes to the editing department. I'm asking them to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to get it edited multiple times as opposed to just one time. And I'm like, oh, well, I can kind of try to be more forgiving of those things. And it's not just a matter of typos or those sorts of things. It's also like the pacing of the story or things that maybe certain parts could have been cut, or maybe we could have had it a little more foreshadowing to this thing that's just suddenly popping up that actually seems like it's kind of important. We probably should have alluded to it before. I can be a little more forgiving of that. Doesn't mean that I won't talk about if I think certain things really are detrimental to the overall story. I'll still talk about those things, but I can be a little more forgiving. However, there seems to be a trend of self-pub authors, books becoming popular, and then traditional publishing picking the book up and doing absolutely nothing to it, and then just putting it out there, except for now their publishing house is stamped on it. And I'm like, what the heck? This to me is taking advantage of self-pub authors, because so many self-pub authors, of course, they want, I think so many people, the reason that traditional publishing calls to them is because, oh my gosh, is it so stressful when you've finished the writing part and you need to do all those other things I was mentioning, the formatting, the editor, sometimes multiple rounds of edits. You're trying to find somebody to do the cover art. You're trying to find somebody to do the cover design. You're trying to find all these things, but you're ready to just keep writing either your next book or the sequel to that book or a prequel. You just want to keep writing. That's all you want to focus your time on. But instead, you're having to focus your time on all these other things, and that's where a traditional publisher comes into the picture. And you don't want to have to spend tons and tons of money up front before you've even put the book out. So the traditional publisher, like, there's a little bit of security there. So when they get a book that's popular, and then now they're going to make money off of it instead of the money going to the self-pub author entirely, that's where I get really, really, really aggravated. If you're going to pick up a book that was previously self-published, please, please put in the effort to ensure that you're doing everything in your power as a publishing house. You have a whole team of people that can look at this book. Please make sure they do. Don't just put it out. Anyway, next up, I've heard other readers say this, and I agree. People can just hold up a popular book and add text like a must-read for the romanticy girlies. They don't explain why or what they personally liked about it. They're just following the algorithm. Since I'm an old, crusty 30-year-old, I'm more critical about what I consume, but TikTok is majority 13 to 25-year-olds, and it's basically a marketing app at this point. BookTube for life. Okay, so I too am in my 30s at this point, and yeah, I don't have any problem with the idea of there being an app that isn't for me necessarily. Doesn't mean that people in their 30s can't be on BookTok or on TikTok in general. And certainly it doesn't mean that people that are that 13 to 25-year-old demographic can't be here on BookTube. It can serve both audiences, but I understand the idea of certain things are more specific to certain demographics. I get it. But I do think there's almost this like booktube versus BOOKTOK feeling sometimes. And I'm only kind of teasing you a little bit here because you were like booktube for life and stuff. I don't feel threatened by BOOKTOK because BOOKTOK is serving a different purpose than what booktube serves. So I don't mind that both things exist. I think it's fair if you tried BOOKTOK out and you're like, you know what, I actually really like this short form content, great. And if you're like, I don't like this at all, then, you know, don't keep looking at BOOKTOK. But I also, in saying that, I don't think it is something that is far removed from being criticized. I think you can still absolutely have criticisms of it, and I do think that what you're describing of just being like, it's a must read, and you're like, yeah, but why? Why is it a must read, though? I'm thirsty. Hold on. Okay, this next comment's funny. Good Manticore says, be willing to admit that a lot of books on there are trash. And for people who are so judgy, let people enjoy their trash. I don't mean that term derogatorily. A lot of what I enjoy is also trash. I'm tired of the argument over whether people should be reading and enjoying high literature. Okay. I both love your comment and also I'm kind of like, well, so I think it's just hard for people to not hear the term or the word trash and think that it's derogatory. And I think the term or word, I should just say it's a word. I think the word trash gets very specifically used towards things that are more romance oriented. Not always, of course, but there are plenty of things that are just like, I don't know, all action, not really substance. And I don't necessarily see the word trash being used for those things quite as often. And maybe this is just the things I have seen. Doesn't mean it's right. And that I'm correct here and that never happens. But I guess I think the reason I have a hard time with this is because I'm sorry. I feel like at some point in all of these, I'm like, did you know I majored in music? Well, I'm going to draw a comparison to music for a sec here, but I am going to do that. So I majored in strings pedagogy and I play violin. I love orchestral music. I love symphonic music. I think it's amazing. Instrumental music to me is the best. And I also consume pop music. Some pop music where the singers are, I think, amazing singers. However, I think that the music is so basic that you can't even tell they're good singers. And also there are certain songs where I think the person isn't a good singer and the music is really basic, but it speaks to people or it motivates people, or they're like, but the lyrics though, yeah, but it's not very good. It's not good. And I have to fight that inner snob in me sometimes. And I won't give specifics as to which artists make me feel this way, but there are some artists where I'm like, I don't get it. I don't get it. Why can't people just admit, like, I like it because it's catchy? You know, like, I have that same reaction as what you're describing, where I'm like, just say it's fine. Who cares? Just say, I'm not saying it's bad to like it. I'm just saying it's not very good. So it's hard I feel it. I definitely am with you in that I have that very natural reaction, but I also have to tell myself, okay, hold on. Do you consider music art? Do you consider books art? And art is very much, for me, it has to have a relationship with the consumer. I think, you know, it's one of those, as dumb as this sounds and as cliche as this sounds, it's kind of like the, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, like, does it make a sound? You know, that whole thing. I mean, I kind of feel like, what is art without human interpretation? And if you feel really moved by a certain song, then I'm like, how? Have you heard Hilary Hahn play Paganini? Have you? Because if you haven't, then, like, you don't even know. You're, like, as much as I want to shout about those things, I'm like, yeah, but maybe the lyrics really moved somebody and they really got them through tough times and it speaks to something they've experienced, you know, all that stuff, which is important stuff. I'm not being like, you know, whatever, trauma and stuff. I don't mean it like that. I just mean I know a lot of what I'm saying are these cliches. So I don't know if I want people to feel like they have to say the thing they like is kind of trash. But only because what some people consider to be really good, other people are like, no, but that is trash though. And other people are like, but I think it's good. So I don't know. I get completely where you're coming from. I just also, I don't know. People just have different, I genuinely sometimes will pick up a book and I'm like, I literally have no idea. I really don't get it. I don't get why people think this is good. I don't get people that like this. I don't understand why they think this character is compelling. I'm really emphasizing that I'm right there with you, but I don't know how much I want people to be forced to say that what they like is trash. Now, on the flip side, I also don't like the people that insist, like, well, you're not really working your muscles, though. Imagine somebody being like, I've seen this actual thread before so I'm kind of sort of paraphrasing something I've seen on Reddit. But somebody basically drawing a comparison to working out, and they're like, yeah, but you can't be like, yeah, but I'm getting stronger because I'm working out, and all you ever do is lift a 1-pound dumbbell. Okay, well, you're not actually working your muscles, and your brain is a muscle. If you're never actually reading anything difficult, you're not actually improving your brain or what. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. I've said before, I don't like when we view reading as like this thing that exists within a vacuum, as if a person can't be, like, some of my friends are doctors, and they like to read books that some of us might consider to be bad. And I'm just like, okay, well, they're saving people's lives, all right? So what the heck, me on my horse being like, but you're not really challenging your brain. And also people would look at the stuff I read and they're like, you're not challenging your brain. You know what I mean? So I also don't like when people insist that you have to read a certain kind of book, because I'm like, do you? I'm pretty sure the earth will continue to revolve around the sun, whether we read high literature or not. So I understand all around what you're saying. I just maybe have some additional things that I felt, I guess, compelled to say. Okay, I don't use BookTok because I prefer longer reviews for books and longer videos with a theme, new releases, new favorites, DNFs, etc. I also like vlogs with lifestyle elements or watching the content creators' reactions as they go. So it's YouTube for me. And Hazel Phoenix 203. I'm only going to continue on because we've kind of touched on this, but I will say again, yay, great for you that you like YouTube. But also, I don't want anybody to feel like I think it's a battle between the two. One of my BookTok pet peeves is when people hold books next to their face when the video is mirrored. It makes it way harder to read the title. Okay. Then BookTok creators, those of you who are on BookTok, take note. I have no valid opinion since I don't watch TikTok. I really like that. I appreciate the humility there. This next one says, I feel like BookTok promotes buying books and spending money on special editions and decking out one's personal library. I wish more BookTokers, I know some BookTokers do this, I just want more, would promote using the library and or Libby. Yeah, whoops, sorry. That would be nice. Libraries are great. I just agree with you. I think libraries are wonderful. Do I care if people want to buy special editions? Not really. Unless you're planning to buy it just so you can sell it for a really absurd price. I care about that. That annoys me. But I don't mind if you have a home library and you love your home library and you spend a lot of effort on your home library. I don't really care. And if you want to take people along in that journey, okay. But I do think that talking about the library is important and helpful. I just think so many people have no idea how much the library does, not just for books, but for the community as well. This next one's getting into some stuff. I'll just read it. Stop involving people, especially minors, into your spicy headcanon. You are free to enjoy your preferred genre of books, but don't assume random people on TikTok enjoy being sexually harassed just because they might have a slight resemblance to someone you read about. There are creators who actively take a role in role-playing a certain character. No issue there. Engage with them. But as a rule, leave minors out of it. Absolutely. Who the heck is doing that? That's really weird. That's really weird. I don't like that. And I think I know what you're talking about with the including people in your... Sorry, I'm adjusting because it's it's really hot. I have to turn my air conditioning off. I've mentioned this before. And it's the summer, and it's like 115 degrees outside, but my air conditioning's right there. Anyway, so I just start to get like uncomfortable. I gotta move around. But anyway, so I think I know what you're talking about. There are people who will, I think this happened with some hockey player where everybody decided that he represented this hockey player in some hockey romance or something. And people were making merch or something and just like extremely sexualizing this man. I hate that. Again, like you said, if somebody wants to kind of represent that and almost like cosplay as that character and be like, yeah, look at me, I'm that guy in that romance story you like. There are literally people that are narrators who you can go to their Patreon and you can pay for them to just talk to you and say your name in like a sexy script. So if you really want, there are creators out there where you can find that and then have your, whatever fits your fancy, go for it. But don't do that with people without their permission. That's harassment. That's harassment. Next up, Dragonheart29 says, just be more honest instead of following the trends in hopes of going viral and gaining more followers. Share what you actually like to read. Don't pretend. And then your genuine enthusiasm will attract like-minded people to follow you. I 100% agree, but I will add that it does not need to be genuine. That's the downside. There are people, most of the time not. I just want to be clear. And this is not a BOOKTok only problem. I think that this is all over the internet. There are people who will act as though they love pretty much every popular thing. And I'm just like, really? How? You like all of these popular things? You don't have any criticisms? You have exactly the same opinion of this well-established fandom for all of the things you check out? Are you sure? But anyway, I think part of the problem is that they get views, and people can be pretty good at faking when they like a certain series or a certain story. People are good at being like, oh my gosh, this was amazing. Especially if it is already a well-established fandom, they can just see what the fandom says and then echo the things that the fandom states so that they're like, yeah, exactly. Maybe it seems a little unnecessary, but this is part of why when I go into new things, I avoid at all costs other people's thoughts and opinions. I try not to look at anything the fandom has ever said before if it is something that's well established. And then for newer releases, I try not to look at anybody's reviews. If I'm watching a book video, like a wrap up, and somebody's going to talk about it, I often try to skip when they talk about those things because I am hyper aware of this issue. I do not want to take other people's thoughts. I do not want to try and act as though the popular opinion is my opinion just so that I'll get more views and more likes. However, just because I'm aware that people are good at pretending like they like stuff, and again, really want to make clear that it's not everybody. In fact, the majority of people, if they're hyping up something and they really like it, it's because they genuinely like it, not because they're trying to appeal to a certain group. But while I recognize that that is a thing, I would love what you're talking about, of people just talking about what they genuinely like, not caring about if other people like it. Especially for me, there is the idea of, I also make money off of this. I do not want to make money off of other people's thoughts and opinions. And so as far as like going through books, obviously I'm like literally reading through your thoughts and opinions, but I'm trying to be more like conversational in this video. I'm not looking at what you said and then pretending it's what I had to say. And so with books in particular and reviewing books or even just any other kind of story, I absolutely I don't even want to see what the fandom is saying. So as an example, over on my side channel, Full Meta Analysis, I had never watched Avatar: Last Airbender. When I watched it, I was like, I am avoiding everything that's out there because I don't currently have it and I don't want to know it because I don't want to accidentally just start telling everybody what they already think and how they feel just so that they can be like, oh yeah, we're on the same page. If I have a take that you're like, whoa, that's not the popular opinion, that's just like a genuine thought. I don't want to avoid stating my genuine opinions just because I want people to like me or something. And same with like, I'm watching Attack on Titan right now. And I had, at first I was like, I don't know. The only thing I listened to is people said switch to the sub, and they were 100% right about that. But as far as like what you get out of it, I don't want to see what other people have said just so I can throw that right back at you, and then you'll feel like, oh yeah, they get it. Oh my gosh, they have the exact same feelings as me. Like, of course, you basically handed them a script. I'm not saying it's the fandom's fault. I'm just saying when creators ahead of time look at all of that stuff, I think that it is, even if they don't mean to, it is really difficult to not just start to tell people what they've already discussed and theorized and felt. That said, just because I'm mentioning that doesn't mean I disagree with you. I agree. I think it would be best if everybody was really honest. Next up, an underrated book is a book that has up to 10,000 ratings on Goodreads. A book that came out 10 years ago and has 400,000 ratings is not underrated. A book that won several awards is not underrated. A book that was a New York Times bestseller list, was on the bestseller list for 20 weeks is not underrated. Yeah. I've seen people before mention Six of Crows, and I'm like, what? That's not underrated. And then we have, I think the internet is really hard on people who read a lot of TikTok books, but I'm in the camp that more people are reading, and that's good, and usually people have changing reading tastes, and this could inspire them to branch out. Also, not all TikTok books are bad, and even if you don't like them, let people enjoy things. I think this is a really nice comment, and I would like to end on that because we have been kind of negative, and I think that's a lovely way to sort of balance out a little bit some of that negativity. I have found that, and I do kind of want to do a lot more videos about BOOKTOK because I find it kind of fascinating, but I have found that there is sort of this interesting way of categorizing any new book that, or any book that's becoming popular. We categorize it as BOOKTOK, as a BOOKTOK book, even if it's not necessarily just popular because it's BOOKTOK, but rather we say it is because it will get more attention in if it's in the title of a video, and also there is kind of this, oh good, I'm gonna get to see somebody pick apart this like trash, this garbage book, and that'll be fun. And you're like, but it's not really a BOOKTOK book, it's just a book that they read that they didn't really like. So as an example, somebody might say like, I read this BOOKTOK, I don't know, like mafia werewolf romance, so you don't have to, right? Something like that. And then people will be like, oh yeah, I want to see what they have to say about that dumb book because I'm sure it's a dumb book. And you're like, yeah, but is it a BOOKTOK book? Is it though? Is it actually a BOOKTOK book? Like people know, oh, I know my audience has a certain view of BOOKTOK books, so I'm going to feed into that so that I can get views, and then we can all collectively pat each other on the back and feel good about ourselves for like not reading these books though. And you're like, okay, cool, you really did something there? I don't know. I do think that that exists. Am I alone? Am I the only one thinking that exists? When in actuality, some of the books that are popular on BOOKTOK are books that we like too. That's what's funny to me. I did a video where I was tier ranking popular BOOKTOK books, and in order to find those, looking at a lot of different lists, some of them were libraries, some of them were retailers, and some of them were like literally, I know Amazon's a retailer, but like Amazon will say best of BOOKTOK, and for some of them. And the ones that come up are sometimes not even a little bit what you would expect, and sometimes they're exactly what you expect. But I do think that we have a tendency to generalize, and on one hand, I don't think it's above criticism. I don't want to try and act like everything is peachy and sunshine and roses and there's nothing negative that can come about. But, and this isn't a thing at you, I'm not saying that when I say like, we do this, I've seen this, I'm not saying like, I'm special and I don't do this, but you do this, and so let me speak down to you. I don't mean it like that. I just mean I have noticed certain trends in how people think of and react to BOOKTOK, and I think sometimes that comment that was like, I don't have valid opinions because I don't go on it. I think sometimes that might be a healthy approach. So that's why I thought that last comment I just read was a nice one to end on, because there's some good books, I think anyway. Some of the books that we like, they're on there. It's not just whatever random book that you think is bad. It's like the word bad is synonymous with BOOKTOK now. That makes me a little sad. But anyway, I wanted to end on a positive, and I feel like I made it kind of somber here at the end. The day this video goes up, there will be a new community tab post and a new post over on Patreon. If you'd like your comment for sure to be read, then I will always read the patron comments, but regardless, this will be up in both places to writers from readers settings. And you can let me know all about your thoughts when it comes to settings and books. And I'm looking forward to that one. I feel like maybe there will be less heated topics in that one, and it's just going to be like, I like when they describe the colors of the leaves or like the weather, things like that. So I look forward to that one. I think it'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a little bit more writing oriented, which I think will be a nice shift from this one. But thanks so much for watching. Thank you as always for your participation in these. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye. Should we take a peek at Luna Bear? I think we shall. Hi, Luna. You comfy? Yeah? It's hot. We should turn the air back on, huh? I think so. I think so. You're right by an air vent, too. I think you're trying to tell me that you miss it. Air! Let's turn it on. Big stretch first, though.